So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this morning, Cultural Heritage in a Technological Age, the 3D Scanning of the Worimi Fishing Tree. It's a bit of a mouthful. I would like to acknowledge country. I'm on the land of the Pambalong clan of the Awabakal people here in Newcastle. The University of Newcastle has a large footprint area, and I acknowledge the Worimi and Biripi to the north, the Wonnarua to the west, the Darkinjung and Eora nations to the south. I pay my respect to the wisdom of elders past, present, and emerging, including our guest today, Nicole Chaffey, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here today. Feel free to acknowledge the country that you're in the chat. As I mentioned, we are joined today by Nicole Chaffey, a proud Biripi woman, and she is the Museum and Gallery Director up at the Murrook Culture Centre on Worimi country. Nicole's the instigator of this project, which is about how technology can be used to engage and learn about cultural heritage. So before I hand over, I just want to mention that you can add your questions throughout into the chat, and we'll look for an opportune moment to ask Nicole. It's very informal. So if you have any questions, just pop them in that chat. Also, we will be making a recording of this webinar available to anybody that registered, and it will be posted online. So over to you, Nicole.
Thank you, Ben. I would also like to acknowledge country. I'm a Biripi woman, living on Awabakal country and working on Worimi country. Worimi country is Gadang country, which is our language, and Gadang is my language. So I just want to very quickly say, Minyang, Yura Wubalin, Yura Yigu Marala Baragu, Yi Gathang Guba Barai, Gathai Niran. Welcome, what are you doing? You have come here. This is Gadang country. Let us go together. So I'd like to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who might be joining us today, pay my respects to all of our elders, past and present, and acknowledge those who are coming through and emerging. Sorry, my phone's just going wild, just at the perfect time. I'm the Museum Gallery Director at Murrook Culture Centre. I have been in this role for a relatively short time, and today I just want to go through a little bit of the story of this space before I arrived, and looking further into the future and a few projects that we've been doing. So just click through here. The Worimi Local Aboriginal Land Council. It was incorporated in 1983 and evolved from meetings in lounge rooms to the purchase of the Tomteland site here in Williamtown in 2003. The Tomteland site's given the organisation that space to be able to grow, but it hasn't been without its struggles. But in 2007, the Land Council organisational structure was amended, and they created the Land Council that we recognise today. Now, there's a combination of business lines and cultural education services that have been established, and through the commercial success of those enterprises, the Land Council has been able to grow in size and outreach. So here are a few of their services and features that we offer here. Probably best known widely for Sand Dune Adventures. The Sand Dune Adventures, I think, began in about 2008, 2009, the brainchild of our CEO, Andrew Smith. They started with 9 bikes, and we now have nearly 150. So we welcome visitors from all over Western Sydney, Sydney CBD, pre-COVID, a vast number of international visitors. We have the luxury of being very close to the airport, and so we managed to collect a lot of that Port Stephens tourism. what is different about our sand dune adventures to other quad bike tours is that there is that cultural content. The Worimi Conservation Lands is the largest moving sand dunes in the Southern Hemisphere, and it ranges across a number of different types of habitats, and it's full of ecological significance as well as cultural and heritage significance as well. Culture and Heritage Unit is probably one of the first business units here to get up and running. There was a huge demand for cultural content in schools, for corporate groups. So Justin Ridgway, our Culture and Heritage Manager, takes care of that. And we've also got the Green Team. And so they work with National Parks and Wildlife. They help maintain the Worimi Conservation Lands, as well as other lands in the Worimi Land Council's possession. So the hub for, here's just a little shot of our parklands. While the museum's not up and running yet, or the interactive centre, the conference and function space is up and running. Our cafe is up and running. So please, guys, if you're travelling through, don't be a stranger. During the week, you can come and grab a coffee or a sandwich or something yummy. And we've got those beautiful parklands for everyone to enjoy. So in 2014, the Land Council was granted approval for a multi-million-dollar redevelopment of the parklands and infrastructure. So this would include a dedicated space for culture and heritage, educational programming, a cafe catering unit, and a state-of-the-art function and conference centre. So the building lost its somewhat iconic boomerang from the front, and the space was reimagined by local architect firm Derived Design in a sprawling structure which communicates connection to Worimi connection to land, language, and its community. So here's the architect's envision drawing of the space, and so that's pretty much what it looks like today. Construction was completed in early 2020, but COVID obviously delayed any further development of the space until my appointment to the director's role in July 2021. Now, the success of the Worimi Land Council has allowed the executive and board to invest capital back into an interactive and educational space and deliver a keeping space as well that will represent the story of Worimi people and Aboriginal people who live on Worimi country. So here's just an example of the spaces that are available, and the interactive centre, which I'm developing, is expected to become a hub which joins all of these interlocking and interconnecting spaces together. So to be an additional resource to culture and education. Oh, sorry, my computer's just slid down. As well as managing and administrating the the function and conference space, as well as the catering space as well. Okay, so here is my blank slate. This is what I arrived to in July 2021, which seems like a really long time ago and feels like no time at all. So this is what we're working with. We've got about 700 square meters of space, so I guess one of the first challenges was, well, what do I do? What stories do we tell? What do we develop? And so a series of filmed interviews with elders, community members, and Land Council staff has informed much of the preliminary content development. Topics that came from those interviews range from talking about the history of the Worimi Land Council and Worimi Conservation Lands, to the early lives of people who've grown up on the Karua mission, people who've worked in the port in either the oyster or the fishing industry, and to those that have gone up into the mountains and worked for the timber industry, all the way to its special places, both personally and culturally, and spiritually, and dreaming stories, particularly from our dear elders. So language, history and personal experience are the key, I guess, themes of the space, and this is what we're developing. So from the moment you walk through the front doors, you're immersed in Worimi community, Worimi culture, and we're we're aiming to really get that point across that Aboriginality and Aboriginal culture is not something that is stuck in historical context, that it's static and that it's back in time. We're really wanting to demonstrate and present the Worimi people particularly for what they are, which is a dynamic and brave and pioneering and contemporary group of people. And just the success of this space so far as the Land Council and its business units are example of the brilliance of these people who are leading the way for their community. So emerging from those community workshops as well was an expressed desire for significant objects, technologies and stories to be represented in the Murrook Culture Centre space. So there's investigations that are ongoing for various repatriations, but one object in particular is the fishing tree. Now the fishing tree is on display, situated within Newcastle Museum. Now it was quite significant culturally and in the context of fishing and hunting. It was a lookout tree. It stood at Bagnall's Beach, just on the southern coastline of the port, and it had been used for generations of Worimi and Biripi people, as oral stories will tell, as a lookout for usually probably a child would jump up there and keep a lookout across the water for the dark shadows, which signified that there was a shoal of fish. It's particularly used at the time of the mullet run, when large numbers of mullet were coming in from the ocean to head up into the rivers, into freshwater to spawn. So the mullet run was a significant point of the year for Worimi, the Awabakal and the Biripi people. The food was plentiful, the fish was oily, and of high nutritional content as well. So whenever the mullet ran, they'd head out with their nets and grab themselves a mad feed. So the tree stretched out over the water. And over time, you can see at the top, when you examine the top of the tree, there have been footholds carved out to allow for better, more stable scaling of the tree to get up the top and get that overview of the water. So a finder would climb up the tree and look in the water for fish, and the direct people in canoes or on foot in shallow waters to areas where the fish were schooling, so they could either spear the fish or gather them up in nets in the shallows and catch a great volume of fish. Now, the tree is estimated to have lived for about 300 to 400 years. It lost its top in 1960, and then in 2001, Easter weekend, so the anniversary of which is just passed, it was burned by vandals, and at that point began to degrade quite significantly. So there was a fear that the tree would be completely lost. So National Parks and Wildlife particularly reached out to Newcastle Museum to see if they could assist in the conservation of the tree. So a team of volunteers and staff from Newcastle Museum went out to Bagnall's Beach, cut the tree down and took it back to the honeysuckle precinct, because at the time Newcastle Museum was in the midst of their redevelopment and their move over to the honeysuckle site. So they effectively built the atrium of Newcastle Museum around the tree. Now it was, so here we go. Here's some images, some more images of the tree in situ, with the gorgeous David Hampton acting as human scale for me to really give that sense of the scale of the tree. It's really quite imposing. Now, there's been significant conservation work to the tree. It's very brittle. There's been a series of bug infestations which have had to be dealt with. And so fumigation is an ongoing issue as they keep coming back. And the significant engineering of a steel structure inside the tree to actually keep it intact. There's this, as you can see, there's quite a significant crack, a spiral crack that that follows the grain around the tree for almost half of its length. So you can imagine that any really sort of rough handling or bumpy roads, etc., would put the tree at quite a risk of destruction. So there was a wish, particularly because of the redevelopment and the construction of the Murrook Culture Centre, that the tree should come back to country. And after a series of risk assessments and significant surveys that were conducted by myself and National Parks and Wildlife and Newcastle Museum, it was deemed to be too great a risk to move the tree. Logistically, part of the museum would have to be dismantled to get the tree out. Then we'd have to get the tree on a, well, it's too big for a flatbed truck. We'd have to get it on a semi-trailer. And then we'd also have to dismantle part of our building as well to get it in on this end. Coupled with the danger of it being on the road, we decided that the risk to the tree itself was too great. And so it was kind of left then to think about alternatives. How do we represent the tree within the Murrook culture space, and within the context of the Worimi people and the rest of our collection here at Murrook Culture Centre? So I enlisted the services, so just really briefly, here's a baby tree on Bagnall's Beach. So if you can imagine this tree in 400 years' time, you'll get a sense of what the fishing tree would have looked like on the site. So it would have been quite imposing and really beautiful. So I enlisted the services of a Brisbane-based company named Scan Hub. They sent, it was a task with Queensland border closures and rolling lockdowns, etc. I think we were third time lucky with booking flights and getting a technician down here with his scanner. Now, the technology has moved on a little. Those of you who are familiar with, those of you from Newcastle Uni who are familiar with the Augmented Library and the GlamX Lab will have a little bit of an idea of how a 3D object is scanned and a file developed. So you would scan with one device, which would provide you with a wire mesh. And then in order to get the texture, you'd then have to photograph the surface of the object in a process called photogrammetry. And then you'd put that into a program and it would mesh all of those images together, overlay them onto the wire mesh, and then give you your texture on the object. So it's a sort of two-part or three-part process. This new scanning technology, and I had a choice of whether to use a static 3D scanner or which would sit on a tripod and would just take sort of 360-degree views, or hand scanning. Now, usually hand scanning is reserved for much smaller objects than this, but the texture, but capturing the texture of the tree was particularly important for me. And you always need to plan for obsolescence. So because technology changes so quickly, what is top of the range, or maximum output or input today could be very different to what's available in 6 months' time. And so the fact that this scanner took the wire mesh and the texture at the same time, removing that extra step of having to do the photogrammetry on the object, is proof of that. We've had to, for many years, we've had to do that 2-step process to get the entire object scanned and into a 3D model. So bless Scott, I believe his name was, I can't remember. He dialed the resolution up to maximum. And so it was fantastic. We got amazing results just on the preliminary images that we saw on the day. These are just photographs of his screen on the day. So, already looks amazing. But unfortunately, when he took the raw data back to ScanHub to render it, they didn't have the processing capability to do that. So it actually took nearly 5 weeks to render this single file because the data was just so dense. So they did dial the resolution back a little bit and actually send it to the scanner's manufacturer for their computers to render the file because they just didn't have the capability. So I'll just click on down here because we've got very fun. So here's an example, just a low resolution example on the internet of our tree. So obviously for screen display, we don't really have to worry about resolution too much, but it's once we get into a situation where we're zooming in and we're wanting to interact with the surface, then that's where I feel the texture is most important, particularly in these areas around here. Hope you can see my cursor, where you can see that the trunk has been altered by the hand of human to create these footholds to enable safe passage up the tree. Now the tree itself has these kind of natural stepping points at the base. These nodules, I think, are just beautiful, and you almost can't help but put your hand on them when you're face to face with the tree in the museum. So what next for the tree? We had initially aimed for a July delivery of an augmented reality experience with the tree. But the more we contemplated what was possible with the file that we have, the more we realised that that timeframe was just too constrictive. So the official launch of the interactive space will be happening in May 2023. And so that's our delivery timeframe for the fishing tree experience, if you will. So we're looking at a 2-pronged display method. So with augmented reality, so we can just see the tree in the context of the museum space or the interactive space, accompanied by full height LED screens that will sit within this kind of fish trap structure that we've developed. If you look at this from the aerial view, there'll be LED screens that will wrap around both these areas here. Again, I hope you can see my cursor. And that will contextualize in a very atmospheric way the tree. It will be, beautiful imagery of water and fish and a soundscape. And then the second process will be to actually take the viewer out of the museum and back into country, where we can bring the tree back to life. It can, from a charred stump, it can grow into this amazing, overreaching, leafed tree with, a figure, a character, a young child that runs up and calls out. So, we've got graphic designers working on that madly. It's always the way. There's a lot of development that goes behind the scenes before we can develop something as substantial as this. But we have the asset now in the digital file. I downloaded a tree. It's sitting on my desktop, which is, quite surreal when you think about it in that way. And we will, I'll just, so we've expanded the height of the screens to go the full height of the walls. And this will be an example. If I can go, no, that's my little slide. We'll be able to stand inside this space, surrounded by these amazing immersive film screens, and interact with the tree in this space here. Now, the fit out for the museum is multi-pronged as well, of the interactive space. We are planning on a strategic activation because our conference space is already up and running, and our kitchen is kind of running at sort of 60% capacity at the moment, because we do have a lot of staff on site. We're already holding conferences and functions. We're already having events and hiring out the space. So we really need that hub as soon as possible to welcome people in and to connect all those spaces together. So we are developing and launching the Worimi story, which is the Gujiigu space. If I just zip back to this. So this will be that instant immersion into the Worimi narrative. So we'll have very human scale pods that you'll be able to stand at, and almost like having a conversation with these people where they tell their story, and you'll be able to select from a menu who you'd like to speak to, or who you'd like to hear from, what topic you'd like to hear about, and interact that way. There'll also be a reception space and a retail space, which will connect the front door to the cafe and beyond. So that's all planned for July 2022. It's not 9 weeks away. It's not. I don't want to think about it. But the fishing tree and that amazing fish trap structure is slated for launch in May 2023, when we'll be hosting the National Market Conference in Newcastle, which should be really exciting.
Just sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no.
Just on the tree itself, we've got a question from Nicholas, and he was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what happened in the 60s when the top of the tree was lost.
I don't know, actually. I think it was as the result of a storm. So I believe the tree was already quite long dead at that point. And then you just, gave way, and the top of the tree fell and was swept away in the port. So there was a precedent there for total loss, which is why that there was such a, obviously invasive attempt at protecting and conserving the tree.
I also think it's interesting on the day of the scan that you found somebody that worked at the museum that was actually involved in cutting down the tree and moving it after it was vandalized?
Yeah, absolutely. Is it Bob, I think?
Yeah.
So quite an elderly gentleman who volunteers at the museum. He was part of that team that went out to Bagnall's Beach and removed the tree. So he had some really interesting anecdotes. And one of my tasks for the future is to actually go back and get an oral history from him, talking about his experience, and perhaps some more of that historical information about the tree that we haven't quite uncovered completely yet.
It's like that continuing link that it's still kind of alive in the contemporary memory of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is very much still in living memory. There's Uncle John, who's a Biripi elder, has said that he remembers coming down to Port Stephens and using the tree himself as a child. So it's still very much part of the fabric of memory of the space. And it's this the development of technology, of Aboriginal technology and strategic use of the landscape in order to thrive, which is really important story to tell, because I think historically, in my opinion, Aboriginal people really haven't been given enough credit for their ingenuity and their cleverness in interacting in their landscape.
Absolutely. Nancy also wants to know, are there any plans to take the AR experience back to the original site of the tree?
It's in the 5-year plan, shall we say. Look, there's developing new technology all the time with GPS waypoints, etc. And we'd really like to implement something like that to connect the interactive space here at the Murrook Culture Centre with the visitor experience out on the Worimi conservation lands, particularly at midden sites and factory increase sites that are out there, and the water and the lagoons as well, which are quite important. In terms of keeping an eye on the freshwater aquifer that flows underneath the mountain, right? The mountain there. So once we develop that, I think the sky's the limit in terms of interaction out on country. I have been looking for, and any historians or archivists out there that know of any collections of historical photographs of Port Stephens, particularly Bagnall Beach area, which could potentially show the tree in its original location, would be amazing. So I'm on the lookout for any of those kinds of resources as well.
Awesome. The library did do our cultural competency training up at Murrook, and it's fantastic. So if you do have the opportunity to do that, they do take you out on the dunes and tell you stories and really, really embrace you up there. It's a fantastic opportunity. So take advantage of that if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. The Broken Journey, which Justin presents, is equal parts thrilling and beautiful in the experience of country, but there's a very real dose of reality there as well, and I think anyone who wants to understand the Aboriginal experience on a deeper level, definitely it's worth your while to come out and speak to Justin and either book a group or arrange for a private session.
Yeah, and it's really great to see fledgling, I guess, other like GLAM institutions popping up and like doing really, really interesting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, land councils are so diverse. We're quite lucky to be situated where we are with these amazing cultural and geographical treasures right on our doorstep. So we have really been able to engage with a broader community just through that sense of adventure tourism. You come for the adrenaline, but you leave with some culture, and that's one thing that people most remark on, that their minds are just blown. Like they come out expecting to have fun, and then they return with a completely different sense of the dunes, of Worimi culture, of the area, which is really great. So that's another thing we sort of want to capitalize on with the interactive space, is to take that experience out on the dunes and give it more context. They come in for lunch or a coffee or something, and are able to interact on a more immersive level. Well, I don't know, how can you be more immersive than an in-person experience? But, on a deeper level, to sort of really contextualize their experience out on the conservation lands, and to provide an extra education tool for Justin and his team at Cultural Education, and also be a space where Worimi people and Aboriginal people who live on Worimi lands feel represented, and a space that they can interact with, that has the voices of their ancestors and their family members and their friends. And it will be an ongoing collection of that kind of material, and we won't stop doing oral histories now. We've got, I think, 15 so far, across 2 days of filming, and the material that are in those interviews are just priceless. They're amazing. So that will happen more and more often with new people.
That's awesome.
Mm.
I still can't get over how long it took to render the file. I get cranky every week because I render these webinars and it takes like half an hour to 35 minutes, and I get really cranky about it. But like a 5-week, like that's just mind-blowing.
Yeah, bless Terry, the director of Scan Hub. He'd call me every week and go, "I'm still trying." So I know you're waiting for it. It's okay, I understand.
That's awesome. Well, now's the opportunity. If anybody has any other questions, pop them in the chat. Aside from any questions, I just want to really thank you, Nicole, for your time and sharing this project with us. I think particularly at the University Library, we're very focused on getting people, students into the library, doing, getting a hands-on experience in the GLAM sector. And I think this project is really plays into that and will be beneficial to them. But yeah, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Nancy just wants to know who is creating the sequence that takes the tree to its living state. So the graphic designers you were talking about.
Yeah. So we're currently consulting with an organisation called the Art of Multimedia. So they're working with us to develop the Gujiyigu Worimi story pods and that content. So depending on their workload for the next 18 months, we may just enlist one of their designers or one of their teams of designers. Otherwise, we'll be looking for a tender process and an application process for that. It's still quite niche technology, so there's not many people out there who can do this kind of stuff. And so look, I'd really love to even find a way where we can sort of develop a mentorship program for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are coming through university, particularly through creative industries, where they can even just shadow a designer or other creative in their field of interest and facilitate something that way.
And you yourself have mad graphic design skills. You designed my wallpaper behind me here.
Yeah, I designed the wall. Yeah, I did. Look, I'm a bit outdated now. So it's my graphic design skills. I think I need to go back to school to learn all this 3D stuff. But I like to think I've got a fine aesthetic.
Mad skills. Awesome. Well, there's a few people just saying thank you and that they really enjoyed the webinar in the chat. It's been our pleasure.
Thanks, Nick.
So I guess we can
Thanks.
leave it there. Thank you again, Nicole.
No worries. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.